Start by wiping that fucking dumbass smile off your rose.
They were strangers trapped in a snowstorm, bound together by broken-down cars, delayed flights, and a marathon of travel nightmares. Planes, trains, and automobiles looked like a simple holiday comedy, warm, heartfelt, and full of laughs. But behind the camera, the journey was anything but cheerful. The shoot was plagued by disappearing props, rewrites on the fly, and a first cut so long it could have been released as a miniseries. Tensions ran high. Scenes vanished into the editing room vault. Studio executives fought with John Hughes over the ending, and the performances we remember as charming often came from real exhaustion, frustration, and emotional strain.
You're going the wrong way!
Whispers of deleted footage, on-set blow-ups, and a much darker story still linger. How much of the film we love was pure luck? How much was carefully hidden? And what really happened when the cameras stopped rolling?
Oh, leave it be. Get your lazy behind out here and put that trunk up in the back.
Let's uncover 20 things they tried to hide about planes, trains, and automobiles. When Planes, Trains, and Automobiles hit theaters in November 1987, critics and audiences adored it. But the early test screenings? A disaster. Jokes fell flat, pacing dragged, and the tone wavered between buddy comedy and full-blown tragedy. Studio execs were convinced the movie would tank, and they nearly pulled it from its holiday release slot. What saved it? John Hughes himself, who demanded final cut. He knew buried inside the mess was a leaner, sharper story. Through ruthless editing, he cut nearly half the runtime and sharpened the focus to Neil and Dell's unlikely friendship. The result was a warm, chaotic comedy that found its audience. But for a brief moment, one of the most beloved road movies in history was just a stalled project waiting for the tow truck. For a moment, the classic we know was nothing more than wreckage on the side of Hollywood's highway, until one man refused to let it die. Most road trip movies take months, sometimes years, to write. Hughes cranked out the first draft of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles in a staggering 3 days. The spark came from his own nightmare journey, a simple flight from New York to Chicago that turned into a 5-day travel odyssey thanks to weather delays, reroutes, and missed connections. Holed up in his office, Hughes poured the frustration, absurdity, and strange camaraderie of that trip straight into the script. The pages flowed so fast, his assistant reportedly had to bring him food and coffee just to keep him going. The result was over 200 pages long, twice the length of a standard comedy screenplay. That speed came at a cost. Huge sections would later be chopped, rewritten, or restructured in the editing room. But the DNA of the film, the claustrophobic travel misery, the reluctant friendship, was forged in that caffeine-fueled writing sprint.
Sir,
Hi.
is there something I can help you with?
What the hell are you driving here?
It was less a script than a lightning strike. Raw, unfiltered, and impossible to slow down once it hit. Today, it's impossible to imagine anyone but Steve Martin as Neil Page, the tightly wound marketing exec, slowly unraveling beside Dell Griffith. But when the script first landed on his desk, Martin hesitated. At the time, he was leaning away from comedy of discomfort roles and eyeing more highbrow projects. What changed his mind was the ending. Hughes's script didn't just wrap things up with a handshake and a joke. It ended with a quiet, emotional reveal about Dell's personal life. Martin admitted later that those final pages hooked me completely. The challenge of balancing humor with genuine pathos convinced him to sign on. That decision not only cemented one of his most iconic performances, it also gave the film its perfect straight man, the guy who could simmer, explode, and finally soften all in the same ride.
Screw you. You spill beer all over the bed, you smoke, you mess up the bathroom.
In the end, it wasn't the laughs that sold him. It was the heartbreak hiding between them. John Candy is Dell Griffith in the public imagination, a sweet, clumsy, endlessly chatty salesman with a suitcase full of cheap jewelry and bad jokes. But here's the twist. The role wasn't originally written for him. Early drafts were pitched to actors like Tom Hanks and even Jack Nicholson, who could have taken the character in wildly different directions. Hughes and Candy had already worked together on Uncle Buck and The Great Outdoors, but Candy wasn't initially on the short list. It was only after Hanks passed, due to scheduling conflicts, that Hughes realized Candy's mix of warmth and chaos was exactly what the story needed. Once Candy came aboard, the script shifted. Jokes were rewritten to match his rhythm. Scenes were restructured to highlight his lovable stubbornness. The character of Dell stopped being just annoying stranger and became a man you couldn't help but root for, even as he drove you crazy.
Oh, that feels good.
Casting him didn't just change the role, it changed the entire heartbeat of the film. If you think the road trip in planes, trains, and automobiles feels long for poor Neil Page, imagine sitting through the original cut, a sprawling, nearly 4-hour epic. Hughes's first assembly edit included entire subplots, extended detours, and alternate versions of key scenes. There was more hotel chaos, more conversations in diners, and much more of Dell's backstory. So much, in fact, that early viewers described it as a drama with jokes. Paramount panicked, fearing audiences wouldn't sit through such a marathon, and ordered deep cuts. By the time the film reached theaters, huge swaths of footage were gone. Most of it has never been officially released, though cast members still talk wistfully about the lost road trip version. Hughes's perfectionism meant he kept everything, even if it meant hiding in entirely different planes, trains, and automobiles in a vault somewhere.
You want to hurt me? Go right ahead if it makes you feel any better.
Somewhere out there, the journey still runs on. Longer, stranger, and far more revealing than the one we know. Buried somewhere in Paramount's archives is a scene fans have never seen. A grimy, late-night truck stop where Neil and Dell are forced to hitch a ride in the back of a freezing livestock trailer. In the missing footage, Neil snaps. No sarcasm, no muttering, just a raw, frustrated outburst at Dell that cuts deeper than anything in the finished film. According to crew members, this was the moment where Neil's wall of composure finally crumbled, setting up an even bigger redemption later. But Hughes cut it, worried it pushed the characters too far into hostility and disrupted the comedic flow. The decision softened Neil's arc, but also trimmed away one of Steve Martin's most intense performances. To this day, fans speculate how different the movie's emotional balance might have been if we'd seen Neil, frostbitten and furious, shouting over the roar of a diesel engine in the middle of nowhere.
How do you do, man? My name is Dell Griffith. I'm with the American Light and Fixture Company, Jewelry Division.
It's a moment trapped in cold celluloid, where the comedy froze and the truth nearly broke through. One of the most infamous scenes in the movie, the profanity-laced rental car counter meltdown, was as risky to film as it was to watch. Steve Martin fires off a blistering stream of F-bombs at a stone-faced clerk, played by Edie McClurg, in a sequence that earned the film its R rating. The problem? They were filming in an actual functioning rental lot during business hours. Real customers could hear Martin's tirade echoing across the lot, and a few assumed it wasn't part of a movie. Security guards were called in, and production briefly ground to a halt while the crew explained the situation. In the final cut, the scene runs less than 2 minutes, but it took over a day to shoot, partly because McClurg's deadpan reactions kept making Martin laugh. Hughes fought to keep the uncut version, knowing it was the comedic breaking point for Neil Page. Without it, the whole journey might have felt too polite.
I really don't care for the way you're speaking to me.
And I really don't care for the way your company left.
It was the meltdown that shattered Neil's patience and nearly shut down the set in real life. In true planes, trains, and automobiles fashion, the production was derailed by the same kind of weather chaos that drives the plot. While filming exteriors in upstate New York and rural Illinois, the crew was hit by a sudden snowstorm that trapped cast and crew in their hotels for days. Hughes, ever the opportunist, considered rewriting scenes to incorporate the unexpected blizzard. But the schedule was already tight, and Paramount was breathing down his neck about costs. Instead, they used the downtime for impromptu rehearsals, often in the hotel lobby, where Martin and Candy improvised new banter that later found its way into the film. Ironically, some of the real snow from that storm made it into key shots, giving certain scenes a raw, wind-swept authenticity. The road to Chicago was a fictional nightmare, but for a few days in 1987, it was also very real for the people making the movie.
How much further?
30 miles? Maybe 40?
For once, the storm wasn't a plot device. It was the uncredited cast member that shaped the journey. Steve Martin is famously composed on set. John Candy was not about to let that last. Candy's instinctive riffing often caught Martin completely off guard, forcing the crew to reshoot takes because Martin would dissolve into laughter. One example came during the motel room argument scene where Neil snaps, "You're going the wrong way." Candy's improvised muttering about drunken drivers wasn't in the script. It was just something he tossed in mid-scene. Martin's visible struggle not to laugh is real. Another came in the "those aren't pillows" moment. Candy's little contented sigh and pat on Martin's thigh wasn't scripted, and Martin admitted later that his horrified expression was 90% genuine. Hughes encouraged Candy to keep these moments in, believing the authenticity of Martin's reactions made the friendship between Neil and Dell feel more real. In a movie about two men stuck together against their will, those unplanned cracks in the armor became some of its most unforgettable moments. They weren't just breaking character. They were breaking each other's defenses, one laugh at a time. The most quoted line in the entire movie, "Those aren't pillows," almost didn't exist. The motel bed scene was originally scripted as a quick gag. Neil wakes up spooning Dell. They both bolt upright, cut to the next scene. But during filming, Hughes kept the cameras rolling a few beats longer. In that extra time, Steve Martin, without thinking, blurted out the line. Candy instantly played along, shifting awkwardly and launching into the macho sports talk that follows. The crew erupted in laughter, and Hughes immediately knew they'd struck gold. The beauty of the moment lies in its spontaneity. Martin wasn't performing for the camera. He was reacting in genuine disbelief, and Candy's timing made it even funnier. Without that happy accident, the film would have lost one of its sharpest and most enduring punchlines. Not to mention a scene that cemented its status as a road trip comedy classic.
Those aren't pillows.
It was a throwaway ad-lib, until it became the line that would outlive the road trip itself. For a John Hughes film, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles had an unusually rocky soundtrack production. Hughes wanted a mix of heartfelt ballads and quirky 80s pop, but licensing negotiations fell apart at the last minute. One casualty was a major ballad by a then chart-topping artist, meant to play over the emotional ending. When the deal collapsed, the replacement track was slapped in during final editing. Hughes hated it, calling it a temp track that stuck. The song wasn't bad, but it lacked the sweeping emotional punch he'd envisioned. Music insiders claim the original song would have been a guaranteed chart hit, riding the film's success. Instead, the soundtrack album underperformed, and Hughes swore he'd never let a studio dictate music choices again. It's a small blemish on an otherwise beloved film, but for Hughes, it was a reminder that even a director with clout could lose a fight to studio accountants. It was the one note Hughes couldn't control, and it still echoes as the film's quietest compromise. Paramount wanted a tidy, comedic ending. Neil and Dell arrive in Chicago, say goodbye, roll credits. Hughes fought tooth and nail to keep the quieter, more bittersweet final moments, Neil inviting Dell into his home after learning the truth about his life. Executives argued it was too slow and too sad for a holiday comedy. Hughes countered that without it, the entire journey meant nothing. The compromise? Trim the lead-up, but leave the gut punch reveal. Even in its shortened form, that ending shifts the film from simple travel farce to something deeper. It reframes Dell not as a bumbling obstacle, but as a lonely man clinging to connection. Hughes would later say it was one of the few times he stood his ground completely, and won. Had the studio prevailed, the movie might still be funny, but it wouldn't be the warm, aching classic that still gets rewatched every Thanksgiving. It was the ending they nearly cut, and the moment that made the whole trip worth taking. The released film only hints at Dell's loneliness, but in the original cut, it was unmistakable. Deleted scenes included a moment where Dell tries to call his wife from a payphone, only for the camera to reveal the number belongs to a cemetery office. Another had him quietly sleeping in the train station, his suitcase doubling as a pillow. Hughes trimmed these moments, fearing they'd tip the film too far into drama. Yet cast and crew remember them as some of Candy's most moving work. Small, silent beats that added layers to Dell's relentless cheerfulness. The decision made Dell's reveal in the final scene more of a surprise, but it also erased a raw emotional undercurrent. For Candy, those cuts meant some of his finest dramatic acting never reached the screen. For fans, they've become holy grail footage, proof that planes, trains, and automobiles could have been a heartbreaking drama hiding inside a comedy.
Leave it?
It's been a hell of a trip.
Sure has.
But, after all is said and done,
They were the shadows beneath the smile, moments that could have changed how we saw Dell forever. Most people miss it on the first viewing, but eagle-eyed fans have spotted a subtle cameo in the bustling airport scene near the start of the film. Standing at the gate is Kevin Bacon. Yes, that Kevin Bacon, briefly bumping into Steve Martin before sprinting off to catch his own flight. This wasn't a random extra job for Bacon. The cameo was a deliberate nod to Hughes's other project filming at the same time, She's Having a Baby, in which Bacon starred. In fact, both films share the same fictional universe, and Hughes wrote this little crossover just for fun. Because the scene happened so quickly, many audiences never realized it was Bacon at all. But for Hughes fans, it's a hidden holiday gift. A blink-and-you-miss-it reminder that even in his comedies, Hughes loved to quietly weave his worlds together. It's a fleeting brush with another story, one that slips past unless you're watching with sharp eyes. Steve Martin's character spends most of the film barely holding it together, but one explosive scene in the airport wasn't entirely scripted. During filming, production delays, cold weather, and long hours had everyone on edge. In one take, Martin unleashed a real, exhausted rant that startled even the crew. Hughes kept rolling, feeding Martin a few lines while letting him vent for real. The tension and irritation on Martin's face? That was no performance. It was weeks of pent-up frustration spilling out in perfect comedic rhythm. When Hughes watched the footage back, he realized it was gold. The raw energy elevated Neil's meltdown from funny to unforgettable. Martin later admitted he didn't even remember exactly what he'd said. It was pure catharsis. Sometimes, the best acting in a road movie is just letting the road wear you down for real.
Then you can give me a fucking automobile, a fucking Datsun, a fucking Toyota, a fucking Mustang, a fucking Buick, 4 fucking wheels.
It was the one scene where fiction and reality blurred, and the cracks in Neil's patience became all too real. Dell Griffith's mismatched winter coat and scarf have become as iconic as the film itself. But those clothes weren't the original plan. The costume department had picked out a more muted, realistic look for Candy's character. On the morning of the first big exterior shoot, Candy wandered into wardrobe, eyed a garish shower curtain patterned scarf, and said, "This feels like Dell." It wasn't even meant for the movie. It was a leftover piece from another production. Candy paired it with a bulky parka he spotted on a rack, ignoring the stylist's protests. The combination was so loud and awkward that it instantly communicated Dell's oblivious, cheerful nature. Hughes took one look and told the crew to scrap the original outfit. The new look wasn't just funnier, it made Dell instantly memorable before he even spoke a word. That spur-of-the-moment choice ended up defining the character's visual identity for decades. It was a wardrobe accident that dressed Dell in a legacy no costume designer could have planned. Although Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is set in Chicago and its snowy outskirts, much of it was shot hundreds of miles away. Hughes wanted winter realism, but couldn't predict where the snow would be when filming began. The solution? A patchwork of locations, some in New York State, some in Canada, masquerading as the Windy City. For certain Chicago street scenes, the crew hauled in truckloads of artificial snow and lined sidewalks with fake ice. Outdoor temperatures were often mild enough for cast members to shed coats between takes, despite looking frozen on camera. Only a handful of wide shots were filmed in actual Chicago, mainly for the skyline and Union Station. The seamless blending fooled audiences so completely that even Chicago locals often assume it was filmed entirely in their backyard. The truth is, the Chicago you see on screen is part real, part movie magic, and part snow machine.
However, the radio still works. Funny as that may seem, with all this mess, that the radio is the only thing that's really working good, and it's clear as a bell. Don't ask me.
It's a Chicago built on sleight of hand, where half the winter wonderland was made in a parking lot hundreds of miles away. In early drafts, Dell's backstory was far more tragic. One version revealed that his wife, Marie, hadn't just passed away years earlier. She had died during the couple's honeymoon in a car accident. Hughes ultimately decided this was too heavy for a comedy, fearing it would tip the tone toward outright melodrama. Still, hints of this deeper pain remained. Candy's quiet moments, staring into space on the train, clutching his suitcase, carry an unspoken weight that suggests Hughes had given him more to play with than the audience ever saw. Some insiders believe Hughes kept the darker draft locked away, unwilling to risk changing the film's balance, but also unable to completely erase it from the performances. That may be why Dell feels so layered. We're laughing with him, but always sensing the shadow he carries in his heart. It's the untold chapter that lingers between the laughs, making Dell's smile feel just a little more fragile. Though they collaborated on multiple projects, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles marked the beginning of the end for John Candy and John Hughes's working relationship. Candy loved Hughes, but reportedly felt underpaid and underappreciated during production. Hughes, known for his intense schedules, also clashed with Candy over punctuality and improvising too far off script. The tensions boiled over after filming, when Candy learned just how much the studio had made from the movie's success. Friends say he joked about it publicly, but the sting was real. They worked together again, but the easy camaraderie of earlier films was gone. In later interviews, Candy still called Hughes a genius, but he rarely revisited planes, trains stories, perhaps because the film that gave him one of his most beloved roles also signaled the slow drift of one of his most important creative partnerships. It was a farewell hidden in plain sight. Their funniest journey together also marked the road where they quietly parted ways. When Hughes wrote Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, he didn't set out to make the Thanksgiving movie. In fact, the holiday was almost incidental, a way to give Neil an urgent deadline. But its November release, family-centered themes, and emotional endings cemented it as a seasonal tradition. Over the years, it became the rare comedy that airs annually without losing its punch. Families watch it between parades and football games, laughing at the mishaps while quietly tearing up at the final scene. Streaming has only strengthened its holiday status, with viewership spiking every November. Hughes once said he was surprised by this legacy, that he thought of it as a road movie that happened to end in November. Yet that accidental timing turned it into a fixture of the holiday season, ensuring Neil and Dell's misadventures would replay in living rooms for generations to come.
Oh, you've had about enough of me. First you delay me, then you bump me. I can't wait to see what happens next.
Is this a coincidence?
What began as just another road movie found its true destination, not on the map, but in the holiday traditions of millions. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles wasn't just a road trip comedy. It was a battlefield of egos, weather, and pure chaos stitched together into something timeless. But beneath the laughs and the warmth is another version of the story. One with missing scenes, unspoken tensions, and choices that could have changed everything. And maybe that's why it still resonates, because just like life's messiest journeys, it's equal parts disaster and redemption. There's the film we see every Thanksgiving, and the one the cast and crew still remember. If this pulled back the curtain on a movie you thought you knew, share your favorite Neil or Dell moment in the comments. And hit like and subscribe for more untold truths behind the legends. After all, every trip has its secrets. Some just never make it home.